You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you, all of you, for being here, and I want to welcome you to this event, Government in Islam, Imam Ali as a Model. And actually, this is the second event of our new established organization, Imam Mahdi, at the University of Iowa. First of all, let me introduce the speaker. The speaker is Dr. Odeh Muhawish. He is a graduate of the Global Institute of the Islamic Studies, and where he earned his PhD in comparative theology. He is the author of numerous books and articles, and on the world religions and history of religious development. Dr. Muhawish is an adjunct professor of theology at the University of St. Thomas, where he teaches business law and history of the modern Middle East and Islam. He is also a regular speaker at the many churches, synagogues, colleges, and universities nationwide. Currently, he is a chairman and CEO of the True Scribe Incorporation and serves on several boards, including the Board of Advisors of the College of Arts and Sciences at the Universities of St. Thomas, the Norris Institute, and Muslim Christian Dialogue Center. And also, he is a special advisor of the J. Phillips Center for Jewish Christian Interfaith Dialogue. Dr. Muhawish is an expert on interfaith dialogue and world religions, foreign affairs, and also national and global business leadership and ethics. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the speaker.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. It is great to be with you. My voice gets better, by the way, as time goes by. As those of you who I'm sure we have several speakers here, and you know what I mean. Islam is a religion that traces its roots to the story of creation. So if you're familiar with the Judeo-Christian teachings of the story of creation, when you read that story, and then you read the Islamic story of creation in the Quran, the first thing that you see is a lot of similarities between the two faiths. There are differences, obviously, in the interpretation of the role of Adam and Eve's role versus the one that you find in the Old Testament. Islam teaches that when God created Adam and Eve, as the Quran states, that He created them from the same soul. And then God told the angels, and by extension, all other creatures, to prostrate themselves to this new creation, denoting that Adam and Eve have superiority, they have dominion over earth. He told Adam and Eve, and He told the angels that they are created to be the leaders, humankind, and the custodians of earth. Obviously, this is a great honor, but also it comes with great responsibility. The Quran also states clearly that Adam and Eve and their descendants, their progeny, will come down to earth and inhabit earth as an honor for them. By contrast, in Christian theology, for the most part, our presence on earth is in response or in extension to what is known as the doctrine of the original sin. The responsibility that comes with Adam and Eve and their progeny being custodians of the earth or having dominion over earth is that we're supposed to take care of it. And obviously God is the one who created us. He is the one who gave us the responsibility of having dominion over earth. Therefore, we're supposed to take care of it according to His own terms, not according to our own terms. And then the Quran makes it clear that Adam and Eve and humanity would have a choice in taking care of this earth and each other and all of creation that inhabits earth, that we have a choice to do that. We have a choice of obeying God or not. If we do, then obviously we would inherit paradise in the hereafter, or using the Christian term, we would be saved. And if we take care of it here, then this earth that we inhabit will be a good dwelling for us. It will be a good abode for us. Conversely, if we don't, then we'll mess up our earth, and then we'll mess up the hereafter as well, our own hereafter. So it's interesting that tomorrow is Earth Day, and I was reflecting on that when I was flying from Minneapolis to here, that how much emphasis there is in the Quran, as you will hear from the teachings of Islam and our Prophet about the responsibility of taking care of our environment and taking care of our earth. As God sent us down to earth, because we have choice, then a natural question that we have is, God, we know that you're just, you've created us, you're just, and the act of creation itself is the most manifest act of love towards any creature. We didn't exist, He brought us into existence. There isn't a higher degree of love than that. And now you want us to behave ourselves, to do well. Well, naturally the question, as the Quran states, that humans are argumentative. God says that in the Quran. And then if we are argumentative, then we would ask God, well, how do we take care of earth? And God's answer to us is that I will guide you. When I send you to earth, I'm not going to expect you to take care of this creation, beautiful creation, by guessing or by discovering how to take care of it. I will guide you. I'll guide you through two things. This is what we derive from the Quran. The first one is an internal ability, an internal messenger or prophet, our ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And that is called in Islam fitra. Fitra is the innate knowledge or power to be able to decipher what is right and follow it. In his book, Divine Justice, by a great Muslim philosopher by the name Mutahari, he gives an example of a shipwreck. People are traveling the sea aboard the ship, and the ship is damaged. Everybody dies except for a 2-year-old girl who clings to a piece of wood, and she drifts into the ocean, lands on an island by herself, and there are no other humans there except for animals and butterflies and fruit. She figures out how to survive, and now she lives until she's in her 80s and she dies. He says that if that child, who later became a woman, if she saw an animal, a rabbit, and I'm adding some of the details myself, somebody stepping on it or another animal eating it, she would feel that there was something wrong with that. She wouldn't feel good about it. That fitra we find in ourselves. If you've traveled, I've traveled 5 continents, and I see people of all faiths, all religions, all races, both genders, everything that you can imagine. We find that our inclination to feel good about what is good and feel bad about what is bad is something that is built in us. You stop, you have a flat tire somewhere, whether you are in Iowa or Minnesota, or even New York, believe it or not, or in Africa or Asia. That was supposed to be a joke about New York, by the way, so don't take me seriously there. You'd find that people have the inclination, they feel good about stopping and helping you. It is in us to feel bad about lying. It is in us to feel bad about cheating, about harming others, about all the bad things that we know are bad. The truth is, we don't need to read the Bible or the Quran or any other book to tell us that lying is bad. Somebody, a colleague of mine, Catholic colleague of mine, called the 10 Commandments the Dawah laws, thou shalt not kill. Did God really have to tell us that? Or is it just pointing at the obvious to us? So that fitra is the number one receptacle in us, if you would, to be able to distinguish between right and wrong. And the second power that God gave us, or ability, is a knowledge that is gained, that is acquired knowledge. And we get that through, the natural question for us is, well, God, where do we get that? And God would say to us, I will send messengers, prophets who will guide you, who will tell you what the law is, how to take care of everything. And so Islam upholds 124,000 prophets. Most of them, we don't know their names. We know the names of 25 that are mentioned in the Quran. And they are the prophets that you would know in the Old Testament and New Testament for the most part. And some of the greatest prophets, just to give example of Islam, are Noah and Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Mohammed. Those are the 5 most greatest prophets in the teachings of Islam. All the other prophets that you're used to in the Old Testament and some in the New Testament are the same. They're identical. Slightly different names, Semitic names rather than Latin names to them, but they are the same prophets. The stories are slightly different. Islam's view of the prophets is that they're all came down so that they can set humanity on the right path. They're all infallible. I have a book that is coming out within, I'm told Amazon will release it within weeks. And this is not an advertisement, but it's called Islam and Christianity, Brothers at Odds. And I compare some of the, I actually have a chapter that's called Prophets. So how Islam deals with the same prophets, how Islam deals with, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, how they're viewed in both, both traditions. So if you're interested in further data about that. But all of those prophets came to set humanity right. What that means is very simple. They came to teach us what is right, how to take care of each other, how to take care of the environment, how to take care of the earth, how to take care of animals, plants. We have a responsibility, all of them say to us, that we have a responsibility towards all of God's creation. That we are required to take care of God's creation because we are God's vicegerents on earth, viceroys. That is the gist of what Islam teaches about all the messages. It's a firm belief of all Muslims that what Noah, what Moses came with, what Solomon, what David came with, what Jacob came with, is exactly what Muhammad came with, what Jesus came with, and what Enoch came with, for instance. All of them came with the same thing, which is do the right thing and avoid evil. Evil is that what is harmful to each other. Nothing we do benefits God, nor can we do anything that harms God. Bless you. And so one of the things that those prophets were required to do is to teach humanity what is right, not only in how we eat, how we worship, how we pray, how we conduct ourselves amongst each other, but how to live as societies, as communities. And as part of their job, the prophets was to set injustices, to eliminate injustice. Noah, who according to both Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, worshipped for a long, long time, and he called his people to be upright for a long time. And at the end, he gave up. He didn't give up that easy. The Islamic tradition, not in the Quran, but Islamic tradition says that every time that it becomes obvious that his people would not follow him, he would say, God, let me just plant this tree and wait until the tree bears fruit, and then God send down your judgment upon them. But one of the elements that we find about Noah is that he wanted to create a righteous community. He wanted to create a community that upholds itself and each of its members in a lofty position. We see that Abraham fought the Nimrod, or the Pharaoh of his time, and he brought down a great superpower of the time. The world order of the Nimrod was brought down. And that he traveled to the Holy Land, he traveled to Arabia, Paran, and that was his call. It was all about a call of righteousness. We see that Moses took his people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt, and his goal was to travel. I mean, he traveled the desert. He led his people for 40 years through the desert to head back into the Holy Land to try to establish a righteous kingdom for them. Now, by the way, I just wanted to highlight this for you. So Muslims believe this. Muslims believe that God actually chose the children of Israel as an example for humanity. And then, and this is a little politics here, and then God, through Moses, promised the children of Israel with a condition. It's a conditional covenant, Muslims believe, that if they would fulfill the covenant, that they will deserve the Holy Land and it will be theirs. So that is part of the Islamic teachings. That Holy Covenant, the Quran states, is the coming of Jesus, the Messiah. That if they believed in him, they fulfilled their part with God, that God conversely would say, okay, you deserve the Holy Land. And so as part of the Muslim political theology, Muslims say, well, for Palestine, God promised the Jews, the children of Israel, the Holy Land, but they didn't fulfill their obligation to believe in Jesus as the Messiah, therefore they broke their promise with God. Anyway, a side note of politics here, theological politics. And so we find that that's what Moses wanted to do. All of his journey and the suffering and the death of Aaron through this journey and the rebellion against him and against Joshua afterwards was a quest to establish that righteous community that is governed by a righteous person. Now Jesus, and what I'm going to tell you right now is our Islamic teachings. Jesus was the promised Messiah, and he was born of the Virgin Mary. In Islam, Mary was an infallible woman, and she gave birth to this baby who was promised, and everybody was awaiting his arrival. And the first thing that child does is that he speaks in the cradle to the people. He speaks to his mother, and he speaks to the people when they're there. And so we Muslims, having that belief in Jesus as the promised Messiah, believe that he came down to fulfill and create a righteous community as well, and that he wasn't given the chance to do that, and that God took him up to heaven, and that he'll come back at the end of times to help establish that righteous community. And that indeed he will create what is known in Christian theology or Christian teachings as the kingdom of God. And so each one of these prophets tried. Jesus tried. That's what he came for. He is called the Messiah in Arabic, Al-Masih. That means, it translates literally to the anointed one. That means he would be the king of all people, if he was given the chance to fulfill his promise. But Islam teaches that he wasn't given that chance, and that he will come back to fulfill the very political purpose of creating a righteous government. And so when Prophet Muhammad came, he had the same kind of mission, to set humanity right. What he taught are the laws. Don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill, don't offend others. The Quran says that God does not love the aggressors. Do not be aggressors. Do not ever transgress against anybody else. But we see from day one that Prophet Muhammad came, that his first order of business was to try to change the governmental system that existed, a governmental system that was based on xenophobia, where they had different levels of races in charge, different tribal layers that were in charge, where somebody who was from Mecca, from a special tribe of Quraysh, was superior to a person from another tribe, and somebody who is an Arab is superior to somebody who is a Persian, and somebody who is an Arab and a Persian is superior to somebody who is African, and so on and so forth. And women were not even considered human. They equated them to camels at that time. And so the Prophet came to create a revolution within this corrupt governmental system, to change it into a righteous system. And in every instance where not only prophets come to change the order of the time, but also righteous leaders who were not chosen by God, but who were righteous people, who come to correct a corrupt system, they find a lot of resistance. They find a lot of torture, imprisonment, everything that we can imagine in the book, people encounter that. So if you look at all revolutionaries of the time, most of them, greatest revolutionaries, end up being killed by the people who do not like them meddling with the status quo of the time. The Pharaoh in the Quran, according to the Quran, gathers his people around, and he was somewhat democratic because he tells his people, look at Moses and Aaron. They came here so that they can change our way of life. Really interesting. 1400 years, the Quran specifically talks about the way of life and how the Pharaoh was afraid that Moses would change his way of life. So it's a challenge to the political and economic status quo of the time. So like everybody else, like Jesus encountered with the Sanhedrin. Jesus, by the way, according to Muslims, there was an attempt at his life, and according to Christians, he was killed because he stood up to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the council that was commissioned, the Jewish council that was commissioned by the Romans to represent all the factions of Jews in the Holy Land to control the temple. And Jesus challenged that. The first thing that he told them is that I'm the Messiah. That means you don't have any more authority over the temple. They don't like that. The second thing that he told them is that he told them that the money changers, he said those are sinful people. The acts that they were doing are evil acts. So he challenged their economic system, because he went and turned over the tables of the money changers. And what a system they had. It was a great system. You come to them at certain times of the year, festivals. You change your money, Roman money, to gold money that is minted in the temple. You buy with that money a goat from the temple. The rabbis inside would take the goat and they would burn it, and now your God is happy with you. Great system. I'm a businessman. I would love to create a system like that where you can make money on people for nothing but a feeling. Jesus challenged that. Jesus took a political stance against that, and that's why they had it with him. They wouldn't put up with him anymore. Before, he challenged everything, and the Pharisees would come and question Jesus and try to trap him here and there, and he was always smarter than them. He always outwitted them, And that's where Jesus got in trouble. Prophet Mohammed, the same thing. In Mecca, the first thing that he told his people is that he gathered the 40 mighty men of Mecca, and he asked them a question. He said, if I told you, he said, I lived amongst you for 40 years. And he said, if I told you that there is an army that is about to attack you behind this mountain, would you believe me? They said, 100%, Muhammad. You are Al-Amin, the trustworthy. That's the nickname that they gave him. So he said, I'm telling you that I am God's messenger, God's prophet. They said, okay, cool. What does that mean? He said, the 360 idols you have in the house of Abraham, i.e. the Kaaba, he said, you have to get rid of them. They said, okay, and what do we replace them with? He said, with one God. And they said, where is that God? He said, a God we can't see. They said, come on, Muhammad, this doesn't really work. Economically, it doesn't work. And I tell you as a businessman, it doesn't work, right? You get rid of 360 gods that are tangible, physical, we see them, we charge an annual fee for them. Anybody here in the computer business, software business? It's called a SaaS business. Perfect. You charge for nothing, right? You just put that idol there. People come every year, the tribe who owns that idol, they worship the idol. And by the way, at the same time, they stay in our then hotels, they eat our food, we charge them a lot of money, we charge them protection, great economic system. And now Muhammad comes to them and tells them you have to get rid of all of these idols and worship an invisible God. Not only this, he says, by the way, those slaves that you have, they're equal to you. Your women are equal to you. Your women can inherit now. And they say, oh my God, Muhammad, this is a serious revolution. You can't do this to us. And the first thing that they do to him is to offer him, to tell him to be quiet. Would you be quiet? No. Then we'll make you a king and we'll give you all the money you want and we'll give you all the women you want. And he says, it's not about that. I will not give up. He has a famous saying where he says, if you would give me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, i.e. you would give me everything in the world, so that I would abandon the call of God, I would not. Do whatever you want. And they fight him. They put him and his family in a siege for 3 years. They do economic sanctions. Nobody can trade with them. Nobody can give him food. Nobody can interact with them. Nobody can speak with them. Many of his early followers, Prophet Muhammad, died in that valley where it was definitely a form of economic sanctions. That doesn't work. Muhammad never relents. A lot of people have sympathy for the Prophet now. And so they conspire. What do we do with Muhammad? Do we kill him? Do we throw him in a well and just throw food at him until he dies? Do we exile him? And then they decide that they're going to kill him. And Islam, the Quran tells us that God sent the angel Gabriel to him and tells him, Muhammad, get out of town. Go, escape. As all prophets, according to Islamic teachings, and indeed I'd argue, according to biblical teachings, had an immigration of some sort. Noah obviously was on his ship where he traveled, right? Abraham, he was born in modern-day Iraq, Nasiriya, excuse me. And then he travels to Palestine, to Mecca, and he's a traveler all of his time. He was an immigrant all of his life. I'm not making a case for immigration here, I promise you. And then Moses, the same thing, where he traveled from Egypt to Jordan, back to Egypt. He was a traveler. Then back to, through the desert, through the east bank of Jordan, and he dies and he's buried in Jordan. Jesus is a traveler. Most of his life, according to the Bible, to the canonical Gospels, is unknown. Where is Jesus? What happened to Jesus? Biblical scholars would tell you that in extra-canonical Gospels, we can find traces of where Jesus was. And there are a lot of theories about that. But in canonical Gospels, for a long time, Jesus disappears. Some say that he went to India. Some say that he went to Iraq, Iran. Some say that he went to Europe, France, out of all places. That theory about France, I just don't buy it. I don't know why anybody would go to France. There is another joke that you guys are not getting. So, and Muhammad travels too. He was a traveler. He was an immigrant. He immigrated from Mecca to Medina. When he arrived at Medina, where there were followers of his, the very first order of business that he does is he creates a community. He calls on the people of Medina to take a brother from the immigrants of Mecca. He was an immigrant himself. He said, take them. And he would name every family to take another family. And he says, you're brothers now. So they'd come in with their homes, they would live with them, and he says, God would gather you together in the day of judgment and make you go to paradise together as brothers and sisters. This was one of the most immaculate maneuvers by any leader throughout history. He knew the value of people who are wayfarers, people who needed help. But he knew the importance of creating a community. The second order of business was to create a constitution. So if you study the history of Prophet Muhammad, the political history of Prophet Muhammad, you'll see that he created a constitution for Medina, and the constitution obviously is debated between 22 and 30 articles, depending on the version that you believe in. That constitution, many believe that Thomas Jefferson borrowed elements of that constitution that became part of our Constitution of the U.S. He says in that constitution that no one shall be wronged for being followers of their faith. Then he explains in that article, no Jew shall be wronged for being a Jew. No one shall be forced to convert to another faith. Yes, Prophet Muhammad came with a message and he wanted people to convert to Islam, no question about it. But the instructions that came to him from God is that nobody will be, no coercion, nobody will be coerced to convert. He said, for the people of Medina, whether they're Muslims, Jews, or polytheists, because many of them worshipped idols, really modern day pagans, He said, for those of you who do not believe in the defense of Medina because you don't believe in the law, you don't have to. The rest of the people of Medina will defend you, but then pay a tax. It's really ironic. Today, over 60 countries, members of the United Nations, actually have a law where they have a draft, and they say you can get out of the draft if you pay something like $10,000. So that law was instituted a long time ago. If you don't believe in our cause, let's say that we have a draft here one day. God forbid, I would hate that. But if we have a draft here one day and we institute a law, I can see that happening easily here, where we say you don't have to go, you don't have to be enlisted if you pay a fee. Makes perfect sense. If you don't believe in the war, if you just don't want to fight for any reason. So that's another element that he puts there. He lays out a lot of rights and responsibilities in that constitution. And that constitution is so advanced, even today, that was written 1400 years ago for a small group of people. And he continues on to establish a small government. He sends out messengers to neighboring countries. He calls and accepts delegations from neighboring faith communities, tribal leaders, all kinds of people. And one of the delegations that he accepts is a Christian delegation from Najran. Now, all of my research shows that they were probably East Orthodox Christians. And as you know, Christianity evolves over time. But that's what I can tell about them. So when that delegation shows up in the city of Medina, the Prophet orders the companions, his companions, i.e. disciples, to leave the mosque. And he says, allow the Christians to come in the mosque. And history tells us that the Christian delegation in the second holiest place in Islam set up mass, rang their bells, and erected their crosses. That's freedom of religion. He disagreed. The Prophet, as all Muslims disagree, that Jesus was crucified. We believe that God took him up to heaven before he was crucified. But yet he respected the beliefs of his guests, the delegation that came to visit him. He was visited one time by a man who had moved into Medina, by a man who lived in Medina, who was a Muslim. And the man came to the Prophet and said, "Oh, Prophet, this Christian man moved into Medina and he converted my two teenage boys to Christianity." Listen to this. This man, he said to the Prophet, he said, "Would you exile him out of Medina? Because he's corrupting our kids." Now, I want to say this to Muslims as much as non-Muslims. Notice how the man didn't say kill that Christian man. He said, "Would you exile him?" The Prophet said, "No, I will not exile him." He said, "It's your fault for not bringing your kids to the mosque so they can hear the message of Islam." It's his right to live in Medina, the capital of the Islamic government. No compulsion in faith. And that's what the Prophet believed in. And he sets up all kinds of what we today would call departments, ministries, organizes the whole community. And of course, before they become a strong community, the people of Mecca decide that they want to take them out. So they attack him. There were 15 major attacks on the city of Medina, 88 battles in total in 23 years, in the 23 years that Prophet Muhammad was delivering his message. And I want to highlight to you how often when I'm in debates or I hear from a lot of people say, "Oh, Islam spread by the sword." And that's really a stretch. I'll give you some actual facts about this. In the 23 years where the Prophet propagated Islam, told people about Islam, evangelized Islam, and all the attempts to put the light of Islam out, kill the Prophet, kill all the Muslims, scholars put the number of killed on both sides, Muslims and their foes, at between 500 in the low end and 800 at the high end in 23 years. That's on both sides. Let's take my number is 582. I actually went through and counted. 582 people died on both sides in 23 years. Now, this is not, and I want to emphasize, this is not to exonerate Muslims from violence, because we have a violence issue. And I'll talk about that if we have time. But if you compare that to the year 1099, when the Crusades, in the name of Jesus, and Jesus had absolutely nothing to do with this, Jesus would not have condoned this, in the name of Jesus, arrived in the city of Jerusalem, and in one day killed 70,000 people. So what I say to people is that when people are violent, they're not violent according to the teachings of their faith. There is no way that Jesus would have approved of the Inquisitions, nor would he have approved of the 12 million natives who died in South and Central America in the hands of the missionaries, nor would he approve a lot of the things that are said in his name today. Jesus would distance himself from that, as would Moses, as would Mohammed. The three of them, if they land today and they watch Fox News or CNN, they would get out of here as fast as they can. They will say, we have nothing to do with any of you have done in our names. Anyway, so as the Muslims were attacked constantly, at the beginning, the Prophet refused to engage in defense. And the Muslims kept pleading with him to pray to God for permission to fight back. I have analysis of what happened, if you are interested again in that book that's coming out soon. But I will just tell you the gist of it. The verse then comes from God addressing the Prophet to say to the Muslims, permission has been given to those who have been treated unjustly, that they should fight back. This is the foundation of the scary word jihad that has been misunderstood by non-Muslims as well as Muslims. And then God explains in the next verse the reason for that permission. He says, if we didn't give you permission, then listen to this. This is a verse in the Quran. God says, if we didn't give you permission to defend yourselves, then many synagogues, monasteries, churches, and mosques would be destroyed. And think about this. The Quran didn't say, and temples of the pagans, because the Quran doesn't believe in polytheism, but it believes very clearly in the faiths of Jews. Monasteries are by Catholics and East Orthodox. Could have been other, Christian sects that diminished since then. Churches are of Christians and mosques. God lists the other temples before the temple of the Muslims, saying to Muslims that fight back and defend the rights of others to worship. And we see this in if you Google the letters of Prophet Muhammad to the Christians, we see this in his teachings. He says, no one shall interfere with monks worshiping in their churches, or no one shall interfere or force. He gives an example, a Christian woman who's married to a Muslim man, he shall not force her to become Muslim, nor shall he prevent her from going to church or worshiping at home as she wishes. It's all from this verse. So now the Prophet gathers his people around and he says, okay, you have permission to go fight. And then he makes a beautiful teaching to them. If you analyze what he said there, it is actually beautiful, and it's actually shameful to Muslims, because unfortunately some Muslims violated every one of his teachings, and still until this day violate every one of his teachings. Where he says, do not cut down a tree as you fight. Do not interfere, do not harm an old man, a woman, or a child. Do not interfere with a man who is still in his field. Beautiful teachings. And then there is a teaching, when I mention this to my students, I say, guess why he would say this? There is a teaching where he encourages the Muslims that if they must engage in battle, to try to engage the enemy, if they can, in the early afternoon. And so it's a puzzle, mystery. Why, Prophet of God, would you want us not fight our enemy, except if they must engage us, except in the early afternoon? And the Prophet tells him it's simple. If an enemy soldier wishes to abandon the battle and go home, you want him to have enough time to get home during daylight. He's worried about the enemy soldier as well in his teachings. Those are great teachings. And then he tells him in elaborate details, you can't use fire, you can't poison water, you can't harm animals. My God, the teachings are absolutely so beautiful. And I will tell you right now, Muslims have not lived up to those teachings. So the Prophet dies. And during his lifetime, we find that he never sent out an army to go and occupy another country. Yes, he put armies together. And by the way, we're talking about those armies. They're armies that would fit probably in at least this campus easily. I don't know how big this campus is. Very small, but to defend the existence of the community. When he died, as soon as he died, the Muslims were split, as has happened to Moses, as has happened to Jesus, as has happened to every prophet before. The followers, some saw the prophet's teachings as guidelines, and some saw them as divine revelation. Some saw his words as revelation that we must follow, and some saw them as subject to interpretation. And so there was a great split between the Muslims. Who should lead the Muslim community after the Prophet? On the one hand, you have the Shias, which means partisans, by the way, who said, we heard the Prophet say that Ali is the one who should lead us. We're going to follow him. And by the way, even speaking about this will evoke so many emotions in Muslims, even those who are sitting right here. 1400 years later. It's amazing. So the Shias said, we've heard the Prophet say that God had assigned Ali as my successor. Ali is not a prophet. Mohammed is the last prophet. And the next prophet who will come down to earth was Jesus. But God chose Ali to lead them, the Muslims. And after Ali, we have named 12 disciples. By the way, make what I believe is a compelling argument that the Bible talks about those disciples as well. And then that leads to a number of teachings that I will come back and talk about. Another faction of the Muslims that later came to be known as Sunnis believed that the Prophet left it to the Muslims to decide for themselves. So a few of the men get together in what is essentially town hall of one of the tribes, and they decide to elect a leader, and that is Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph. And they make the argument that the companions of the Prophet have made a decision, we shook hands on it, and that is the caliph. And by the way, for full disclosure, I grew up as a Sunni, and at one point I decided I want to follow the Shia tradition. Still a Muslim both ways, but think of it as, being Protestant and becoming Catholic or vice versa. Okay? Just for full disclosure for those of you who are familiar with Islamic teachings so that you know where I'm coming from. So what many of my Sunni brothers would be quick to say is, well, you guys Shias believe in theocracy. You believe, in a God, a man who is assigned by God, and we believe in democracy and election. That's really not what happened with the Sunni community. Abu Bakr was elected by some of the leaders in Medina, and then Abu Bakr assigned the second caliph. He said Omar is going to be the second caliph, so there were no elections. And then the second caliph created a very interesting system that is actually used in a lot of countries today. The numbers vary, where he said, I'm going to choose for you 6 people, all men, and you're going to choose one of them. And I'm giving them 3 days. He put them in a room, and he put guards there. And he said, in 3 days, they don't elect a leader, kill them all. We should do that to the Republicans. I don't mean that. I don't mean that. I'm a Republican, actually. I'm not afraid to say that. But so that was a very interesting system. And he said a statement that actually changed the history of Islam. He said, I am choosing these 6 men, but if a man by the name of Salim, for those of you who know Islamic history, Mawla Hudayfa, if he was alive today, I'd assign him as the leader. Anyway, so the actions of the first 2 caliphs informed everything that Sunni Muslims, who are the vast majority, have done from that time until this day. I'll give an example. Then we had the third caliph, Ottoman Ali. Then we had the 5th, who was Muawiyah. And Muawiyah's teachings were much different. Muawiyah had a different perspective. This is the Umayyads dynasty patriarch. So Sunni sects, canonically, there are 4 canonical Sunni sects, have split about the formation of the Muslim state. Okay? Islamic state was formed by the first caliph. The second Islamic state was by the second caliph. For a long period of history, one of the Imams, one of the 4 canonical Sunni Imams, had the most following. Until in the 11th century, a young Turkic man, not Turkish, but Turkic man, had a dream. And his dream, his name is Osman or Ottoman. He had a dream that became known as the Ottoman dream. He had a dream that a tree grew from his chest and covered the earth. So he woke up. He was a Sunni Muslim. He ran to the mosque and he said to the Imam, I had an amazing dream. I need you to interpret it for me. So the Imam listened to the dream and he said, okay, this means that you're going to be the caliph, the head of the Islamic State. You're going to resurrect the Islamic State. This happened towards the beginning of the peak of the Crusader movements in the Middle East. Many of the Crusaders had converted to Islam, and when they converted to Islam, for some reason, they escaped to modern-day Kurdistan. It's like if you commit a crime, you run away to Duluth. Same thing, right? So many of them ran away to Kurdistan, where young Ottoman was living at the time. So he gathered a lot of the converts, and he told them the dream, and he said that it is my destiny. I'm going to be the next caliph. Now he's Turkic, remember, he's not an Arab. So he gathered people, he started controlling land, people liked him, he was charismatic. They liked his message, which is, a message of righteousness. We're going to create the Islamic State, which resonates, with Muslims, especially Sunni Muslims. And now he has a swath of land that extended from Kurdistan into southern Turkey. And now he wanted to announce himself the caliph. Some say it was one of his descendants who became the caliph. But he had a challenge. And the challenge was that when he went to the scholars and he told them, I'm going to be the caliph, they said, well, you can't. He said, well, why not? They said, the four canonical Sunni sects, Malikis say it has to be somebody from Medina who's the caliph, because all the righteous caliphs came from Medina. Another one, I don't want to inundate you with foreign terminology, said it has to be an Arab. The third one said it has to be from the tribe of Quraysh, the tribe of the Prophet. The fourth was Abu Hanifa, who was a non-Arab, but he didn't have a lot of people who followed him as a Muslim canonical sect leader. But then he said, Abu Hanifa, he said, no, you don't even have to be an Arab. As long as you're a Muslim, you can be the leader of all Muslims. And he based this on the teachings of the second caliph, where he said, if Salim was alive, I'd make him the caliph. And Salim wasn't an Arab. So he said, well, the second caliph said that he would assign an Arab as a caliph. That means it was right. Therefore, Abu Hanifa said, anybody can be the leader of the Muslims. So naturally, young Ottoman said, okay, as of this day, a follower of Abu Hanifa. The Ottoman Empire lived for 800 years, 600 strong years, 200 sick years. During that time, they didn't force others to convert to the Hanafi sect, but they made all of their officers, all of their ministers, all of their government officials convert to that sect, because they wanted to have religious legitimacy for themselves. Otherwise, other Muslims wouldn't accept them. And 800 years, and by the way, until this day, the vast majority of Muslim countries who were ruled by the Ottomans at one point, they still run according to an amalgamation of Hanafi law, Hanafi Sunni law, and French law. So the actions of the very first Muslims informed a lot of what happened. Now, what the first Muslims have done, Muslims look at it in one of two ways. So the first caliph had some people who rebelled against him, some people who turned away and tried to attack Islam from within. He fought them. Some people who said, we're Muslims, but we reject you as the leader. His reactions to them are still actually subject to debate. Was he right in fighting them, physically and militarily fighting them? Or was that an injustice? And that's a long history I don't mean to get into. But then the Muslims, post-prophetic era, started attacking and occupying neighboring countries. Within 15 years, Muslims have brought down two superpowers of the time and spread Islam throughout. So there are two ways to look at that intra-Islamic perspective. The first one is the Sunni perspective, which is what they have done was miraculous. They spread the word of Islam. They brought people a lot of advancement. A lot of what we have today came from those early Muslims. A lot of discoveries came from those early Muslims. And they point out actually to really compelling arguments, such as when the Muslims occupied Iraq and they were fighting the Persian army, swarms of wasps came and attacked the Persian army, and the Muslims won. A few hundred Muslim soldiers occupied the then and still is largest Arabic country, which is Egypt. The population of Egypt at that time was estimated at 500,000. A lot of people. And then in the Battle of Yarmouk, the Byzantine were defeated by 20,000 Muslims defeated 200,000 Byzantine Christian soldiers. So that's one perspective, okay? What I'm going to tell you right now causes a lot of tensions between Shias and Sunnis. Because what I told you right now is holy and has a lot of sanctity to a Sunni Muslim's heart. So when Shias challenge this, it becomes a challenge to the very holy beliefs of many Sunnis, the vast majority of Sunnis. That's what we're taught as Sunnis. This was holy. Look at the miracles. The people who have done this have done this and spread Islam in a very short period of time. There is another perspective in this narrative, which is Imam Ali, who was the fourth caliph, refused to allow any of his followers to participate in any of those wars, except in one instance that I'll explain. Because he thought that the Quran was clear that you should not transgress against others. That attacking other countries goes against the teachings of the Prophet. Why didn't he do it himself? And I have to tell you, Sunnis have answers for all of this too. I want to be fair. And that those miracles were not necessarily miracles if we examine them. Egypt, for example. I know I hear a lot of people who say, our Coptic Christian brothers are abused by the Muslims and all that stuff. Egypt, for 300 years, remained a Christian. Egypt became a Muslim in mass in the 10th century, 300 to 400 years after the advent of Islam. And the few hundred soldiers who occupied Egypt did so by a political alliance. See, the Coptic Christians of the time were the occupied, and the occupiers before the Muslims came were the Byzantine Christians, East Orthodox. The East Orthodox Christians of the time, arguably until this day, didn't like the teachings of the Coptic Christians. So they oppressed them. They abused them. They were an occupying army. And the Coptic Christians allied themselves with the Muslim army, invited the Muslim army to take over Egypt, and they did in a miraculous short time. So history tells us, this is really interesting, the Coptic Pope of the time is Pope Benjamin. Ben. That Pope, after the Muslims took over Egypt, held Mass in the largest church of Alexandria, thanking the Lord for the victory of the Muslims over the Byzantines, prayed for the Muslims to continue with their victories westward, and not only this, he and the bishops traveled with the Muslim armies to the frontiers to see them off in their fight against the Byzantines. Look at the history of the Muslims going into Andalus, Spain. You see that many of the bishops stood with the Muslims in political alliances against the corrupt royalty of the time. So it was political miracles, maybe. The Battle of Yarmouk was a miracle. 200,000 Byzantine Christians came to the battle, and they were close to Arabia. One Muslim general led the Muslim army there, but he was met with a mighty Roman knight that nobody can defeat. So he held the army back for a month, and he sent to Medina, asking Imam Ali to send one of his followers, who's known as Malik al-Nakhi or Malik al-Ashtar, to come and help him fight against this knight. So he did, and he defeated the Byzantine knight. But then Christian history tells us that as the Christian army was sleeping on the banks of the river Yarmouk, there was a mudslide and 56,000 Christians died. Christian history says they were smitten by the Lord. It's really interesting how we look at our histories, right? We can do no wrong and other people can do no right. Christians do that, Muslims do that, Jews do that, and that is one of the problems that we face. So Imam Ali's perspective in all of those, and the Imams of the Muslims who the Shias accept as the Imams, never believed in those conquests. They never believed that the state should have power over the individual so as to control their liberty or financial well-being or their faith, for that matter. I'll give you an example. I want to be respectful of the time. How are we doing? Okay. I'll give you an example. So the Caliph Abu Bakr and during the second caliph's time, they used to go and collect taxes from people. It's the Islamic charity system called zakat. So what they would do is they would come into a village and they would take over the village and ask people to leave, and they count sheep. They probably didn't have a lot of cows in Arabia, camels, goats, and they would take what they believed was zakah and they would go back with it. Imam Ali, the first Imam of the Shias, the first caliph, did it the other way. He would send in his tax collectors and he would say, stay out of the village a good distance and send one of you to the village, to the town, and say that we're here to collect taxes. Whatever you owe, please bring it to us. Because his system was based on moral sensibility, not illegal sensibility, if you would. And you see that actually in the economic system of Muslims until up to this day, where is the zakah, is the obligation that I have, is it something that the government, and I'm talking here about an Islamic state, can the government force me to pay that, or is it a religious sensibility that forces me or calls on me to do that? They also, the first Imam also instituted something that is found in the Quran, and there is a dispute about its interpretation. That is a flat tax. And I'll tell you, I told you that I'm a Republican. I am, and I really like this teaching too, and I wish all Republicans would agree with me. In fact, I wish that the Democrats would agree with me on it, which is a flat tax. And this is a very simple tax. It says that you pay 20% of your excess income for good causes. 20%. You make $1 million. You spend $100,000, $200,000 on your family and your living. How much is left over? We have any math professors here? $800,000. What's 20% of $800,000? You pay it. You build hospitals with it. You build roads with it. You build orphanages with it. You do good stuff with it. If you made $100,000 and you spent $80,000 on your living, your excess annual income is $20,000. 20 out of 20 is $4,000. You donated for those good causes. It seems to me a really good, fair system. I wish we can implement that in our country. And by the way, there are a lot of fellow Republicans who believe in this, not because it has anything to do with Islam. In fact, they don't know it has anything to do with Islam. It's just because it makes sense. Anyway, sorry to get into politics. I keep doing that because of watching too much TV. So that law is an excellent law as well. I mean, I think it's a law that is a very sensible law. In the battles where during the time of Imam Ali, there were 50 states in the Islamic United States of Islam, if you would, 50 states. There were a lot of revolts against the Imam, so he had to defend Muslims against those revolts. And we find that in his teachings, that he says, never ever fire the first arrow. When you face the enemy, try to put sense into them, but if they want to fight, he would not allow his soldiers to fire the first arrow. He says, wait until they fire an arrow, then we can fight them. And he refused to wear a shield. He would wear a shield on the front, but not a shield on his back, and refused to ride a horse. So when they asked him about that, he said, if I ride a horse, the only reason I would do that is if I want to escape, and I'm not a man who would escape. And they said, well, why don't you wear something on your back? He said, I don't deserve to live if somebody can trick me who comes from me, for me from back. And he said, if I'm riding a horse and somebody runs away from me, I chase them, that is against the teachings of Islam. Because one of the firm teachings of Islam is that if you are on a battlefront, in a war front, and somebody turns their backs to you, you cannot harm them. It is, and I say this to my Muslim brothers and sisters here, what a shame on us for what some Muslims have done to our faith. If only people of the world know how beautiful the teachings of our Prophet and Islam were, they would have a very different outlook on what Islam is. So that's, and putting together a community, a healthy community, whether it's for Muslims or otherwise, is something that is a fundamental teaching to all the prophets, including the Prophet of Islam and his followers, in one form or another. And what had happened to Islam, and this is another lecture by itself, is that during the 17th, 18th century, there were some meddling in the Muslim world where some obscure sects were resurrected, and they are a cancer in the body of Islam today. Now, I hear calls of anti-Sharia movements, and I will tell you, it's really laughable to me when I hear this. I have one of my next books, I'm not sure which one, the next one or the one after, I can tell you what the title is. It's called American Sharia. And when I said that to one of my colleagues, he said, "You'll be killed over that for sure." And what I'm going to show in that is that many of our laws that we have in the United States are really Sharia laws. Please don't be scared yet. Let me explain. First of all, I'm a member of the North America Muslim Shia Scholar Council. We had a conference 2 years ago. These are the top scholars, highest credentials. We got together and we discussed the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States of America is a beautiful piece of work, is a beautiful document. Everything in that document is 100% Islamically compliant. Everything. Secondly, Islam teaches us that, yeah, if you are a Muslim majority, 80%, 90%, you do a referendum. Iran actually made a very good example of this in 1979. Iran had a referendum. The referendum was very simple. Do you want to live according to Islamic law as Shias would understand it, or no? Yes or no? Well over 90% said, sure, absolutely, that's exactly where we went. Then when they did, then that's what they decided. So according to Islamic teachings, when you have a heterogeneous community like we do in the United States, the law by which Muslims and non-Muslims need to live by is the law upon which the collective community agrees upon. And if that law says you can't drive past 70 miles an hour in some streets, that's what you do. If the law says people can't go to a bar and drink, even though Muslims would never drink, at least adherent Muslims, that's what you do. You respect that law. People have freedom of speech, responsible, I hope, freedom of speech. That's what you do. You respect that. Islamic law says you can't consume any intoxicants. Clear. You can't be around them. You can't sell them. You can't produce them. You can't aid in the production. I'll tell you, when it comes to that aspect, Muslims are really boring, right? We just don't drink. We don't get drunk. But when we live in a heterogeneous community, we have to respect the sensibilities of others, as long as we don't force our sensibilities or teachings on them, and vice versa. So this fear of Sharia law is just so nonsensical. It is so fictional. It is incredible to me. The second thing is that, as I mentioned, many of our laws actually came from English law, from French law, which came from Moorish law, which happened to be Islamic law. And I will show in my book that the law of eminent domain is an Islamic law. The law of freedom of worship is an Islamic law. That I will show many, many laws that we have that law are laws that came from Islam, including our election system. I will explain that. I'll stop to see if you have any questions. So we have what is called an electoral system. So in the past, people used to, small towns, get together and say, we have an election in the capital. Let's elect, and every town had an allotted number of delegates. They would choose people to say, you are our representatives, go to town and vote on our behalf. Whatever you vote, we're good with. That system specifically came from the Moors. That specifically came from Imam Malik, one of the four teachers of Sunni canonical schools. where they said Medina is the center, is the capital. We have other cities all around. How do we get everybody's vote on the next caliph? Remember, Shia said the Imam is assigned by God. And I'll explain how Shias deal with elections in a second. But what Imam Malik said, then every town would elect its, what they call them, people in power, people of authority, and they would come and represent that town in the election. That's the delegate system that we still employ today. I am not in favor of that system because now, for God's sake, we have Google, we have the internet, you can vote, you can do a lot of things across the globe. Anyway, but that is one of those laws that people say, and they go and they practice that right, and they say we're against Sharia. They have no idea what Sharia is. I'm not advocating that we implement Sharia, but I'm saying that many of the laws that we are living under, that we cherish, really came from the Moors who were Muslims. So let's not overreact. The way Shias deal with it is that the Imam is assigned by God, but the Imam is not the functional leader. That the community would single vote. Shias do not believe in the representative authorities or the delegate system. That single vote would vote for a number of things. One, the position president, or whatever title we give it. Then in a position of a council, that's called the Council of Experts. That Council of Experts, half of it is elected directly by people, and half of it is elected by experts. The reason behind that is, or appointed by experts, the reason behind that is supposed to be a council of people who are experts on the law. That is exactly the Supreme Court system that we have here. We have the president who is elected by a delegate system, and then we have Congress and Senate. Their job, Congress, is to legislate laws, the Senate to pass and debate the laws. But if there is a debate, we go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life by the president unless they die or unless they screw up, and they're the justices. And in the Shia Islamic system, there isn't such a thing as a supreme leader. There is something that's called the chief jurist. So what you hear about the translations, that you hear there's a supreme leader of Iran, that is a bad mistranslation. The systems between the Shia and Sunnis are similar at the end of the day. They're both designed to implement the laws of the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet, approached slightly different. So with this, I'll stop. I know I can go on and on. We can stop and see if you have any questions. I'll repeat that question. Can I elaborate about the system in Saudi Arabia? There isn't a system. Yeah, there isn't a system in Saudi Arabia. The system in Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. A family of estimated 4,000 princes who own a nation, who own the resources of a nation, who violate literally every teaching of Islam, including in Islam, Shias and Sunnis agree that there isn't such a thing as monarchy. The system in Saudi Arabia is so draconian that I don't think it even fits in the Middle Ages anymore. Extremely oppressive, racist. If you are African, if you're Pakistani, if you're Indian, even if you're Arab from other nations, if you're Egyptian, you're second class, third class, or you don't even have any rights. The system in Saudi Arabia is not Islamic. They don't claim that it is Islamic. It is the only country in the world that doesn't allow women to run for office. Now they allow them to run for local office. It's a joke. They manipulate them. Their husbands have to give them permission to leave the house so that they can run for office. It's ridiculous. I become very angry when people tell me, well, what about Saudi Arabia? Yeah, Mecca and Medina happen to be in Saudi Arabia. They're under occupation by a repressive regime. You look at women in Egypt. They wear the hijab. They are professors. They're cab drivers. They are educators. They run for office. And nobody says this is un-Islamic. The women in Iran, they are captains in their airlines, flying the biggest jets. They're race car drivers. They are nunjutsu martial artists. I love the martial arts. They're nunjutsu fighters. There are more women in the elected body, what is equivalent to our Congress, in Iran than we have in our Congress. You know what really irks an academic like me? Is the double standard, or the double standards that we have. Muslim women are oppressed. Tell that to my mother. Tell that to my wife. Tell that to my sister. Tell that to the women in Iran who are generals in the army, who are professors. Tell that to women in Iraq. Tell that to women in Pakistan who had a woman president, and we still didn't have a woman president. You know, I'm sorry to say, but we are so hypocritical, and we have double standards about who we are. Muslim women are oppressed. There are Muslim women who are wearing the hijab here. Is anybody forcing you to wear the hijab? My wife is a convert. She didn't wear the hijab. For God's sake, I can't tell her to do anything. Try to tell her to take off her hijab.
And 300-degree Sufism.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know? Oh, explain about Sufism? So Sufis are many, many different factions, so that you know, okay? Sufi comes from the word wool. So when you wear wool, that means you're humble, you're monastic, you don't care about this life. I love most Sufis' teachings. And I say most because some of them are militant. Like the Naqshbandis in Iraq, they're very militant. But many Sufis are spiritual, musical, artistic, peaceful. They don't like to engage in this world. And Sufi movements started out both in Shia and Sunni Islam, by the way, from the Abbasids' time, where they created what is called a Zawiya, which is really a corner. So they have a corner house or room where they get together and just talk about God. And now, over time, some of them took different forms of worship. Some of them would, the twirling dervishes, for instance. They do that and they get in, a trance and they think about God. Now, so Muslims argue whether, well, is this Islamic or not? What I say is leave them alone. That is, I'd rather deal with somebody like that than somebody who's willing to blow themselves up on a lot of other people. So I do generally have a lot of respect for Sufis and Sufi movements. And they had political roots, Sufi movements, but that's a long, long subject to cover.
The ecstatic poetry and, beautiful.
Absolutely. Rumi is one of the best poets of all times. Yeah, many of the others. Beautiful poetry. But not many people really get that poetry unless you have some background, It is very peaceful, beautiful. Any other questions or feedback? Anyone? Any comments? Well, thank you very much. It has been great visiting you. I really appreciate it. If you want to approach me afterwards and we can talk, I'd love to do that. Thank you.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.